Hey, beautiful souls, welcome back to Soul Stories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to join our family. Stay with us, because a new love story is about to begin. Prince Alexander had become the most frustrating puzzle in the entire kingdom of Valdoria. At 28 years old, he had rejected every single noblewoman, duchess, countess, and princess that his parents had presented to him over the past decade. The king and queen had grown desperate, their hair turning grayer with each passing season, as they watched their only son dismiss potential bride after potential bride with polite but firm refusals. The rejections had become legendary throughout the land. Lady Rosalind of the eastern provinces, renowned for her exceptional beauty and golden hair that cascaded like a waterfall down her back, had been turned away after a single dinner. Duchess Margareta, whose family controlled the most profitable trading routes in the kingdom, had received a courteous letter declining her hand before she had even arrived at the palace. Princess Valentina, from the neighboring kingdom of Sarathos, whose union would have secured a powerful alliance, had left the palace in tears after Alexander had spent their entire meeting discussing agricultural policies rather than courtship. The kingdom whispered about their prince. Some said he was cursed, bound by dark magic to remain alone forever. Others claimed he had given his heart to a ghost, a spirit who visited him in his dreams and held his affections captive. The more cynical courtiers suggested that perhaps the prince simply preferred his own company to that of any woman, while the romantics insisted he was waiting for a love so extraordinary that ordinary women could never compare. What nobody understood was that Alexander himself could not explain his reluctance. He had met women who were kind, intelligent, beautiful, and accomplished. He had conversed with ladies who made him laugh and princesses who challenged his mind, yet something always felt incomplete, as though he were reading a book with missing pages or listening to a symphony with absent notes. He knew, with a certainty he could not articulate, that none of these women were meant to be his partner in life. His mother, Queen Helena, had finally issued an ultimatum on his 28th birthday. He would marry within the year, or she would choose a bride for him herself. The threat hung over his head like a storm cloud as winter settled over the kingdom, bringing with it bitter winds and heavy snows that isolated the palace from the outside world. It was during this isolated winter that fate intervened in the most unexpected way. A traveling merchant caravan had become stranded in the mountain pass leading to the capital city, their wagons trapped by an avalanche that had blocked the only road. When word reached the palace, Alexander insisted on leading the rescue party himself, much to his parents' dismay. The journey through the snow was treacherous, but Alexander found himself invigorated by the challenge. He had always felt more alive in action than in the suffocating formality of court life, and the physical exertion of breaking through snowdrifts and navigating icy terrain gave him a sense of purpose he rarely experienced within the palace walls. They found the caravan after 2 days of searching, a cluster of brightly painted wagons huddled together against the mountain winds. The merchants were cold and frightened, but largely unharmed, having had enough supplies to survive the wait. Among them was a woman who caught Alexander's attention immediately, though not for any reason he would have expected. She was not traditionally beautiful in the way that noble women cultivated their appearances. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her face bore the weathered look of someone who spent more time outdoors than in drawing rooms. Her clothes were simple and functional, designed for travel rather than impression. But her eyes held a spark of intelligence and determination that struck Alexander like lightning. And when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that demanded attention. Her name was Elena, and she was not a merchant but a healer who traveled with the caravan, offering her services to villages and towns that had no physicians of their own. She had learned her craft from her grandmother, a renowned herbalist, and had spent the past 7 years wandering the kingdom, treating the sick and injured wherever she found them. As the rescue party worked to clear the road and prepare the caravan for the journey to the capital, Alexander found himself drawn to Elena repeatedly. He watched her tend to a merchant's frostbitten fingers with gentle efficiency, observed how she rationed the remaining medical supplies to ensure everyone received care, and noticed how the other travelers looked to her for guidance and reassurance. When he approached her to offer the palace's hospitality until the roads were fully cleared, she surprised him by declining. She explained that her work could not wait, that there were villages in the eastern valleys that had sent word of a fever spreading among the children, and she needed to reach them as soon as possible. Her refusal was not disrespectful, but it was absolute, and Alexander found himself admiring her commitment even as he felt an unexpected disappointment at the thought of her departure. He convinced her to stay just one night at the palace, arguing that she and the caravan needed proper rest before continuing their journey. She agreed reluctantly, and that evening, Alexander arranged for a private dinner where they could speak, without the formal constraints of court protocol. Their conversation lasted until the candles had burned low and the palace had grown quiet around them. Elena spoke of her travels, of the poverty and hardship she had witnessed in the remote corners of the kingdom, of the children she had saved and those she had lost. She challenged Alexander's understanding of his own realm, pointing out inequalities and injustices that never reached the ears of royalty, speaking with a passion that transformed her ordinary features into something radiant. Alexander, in turn, found himself sharing thoughts he had never voiced to anyone. He confessed his frustration with the expectations placed upon him, his longing for a life of meaning beyond ceremonial duties, and his fear that he would never find someone who saw him as more than a title and a crown. Elena listened without judgment, asking questions that forced him to examine his own assumptions and offering perspectives he had never considered. When the evening finally ended, Alexander walked Elena to her guest chambers and found himself unable to say goodnight. He stood in the corridor, like a fool, searching for words that would make her stay, reasons that would justify keeping her at the palace longer. She smiled at his obvious struggle, and for a moment, he thought he saw a reflection of his own reluctance in her eyes. She left the next morning with the caravan, disappearing into the snow-covered landscape before Alexander had even risen from his sleepless bed. He spent the following weeks in a state of distraction that alarmed his parents and amused the court. He sent riders to track the caravan's progress, made inquiries about the fever outbreak in the eastern valleys, and found himself staring out windows toward the mountains as though he might somehow see her through the intervening miles. The queen, observant as always, noticed the change in her son. She questioned him gently at first, then more directly, until Alexander finally admitted what had happened. To his surprise, Queen Helena did not dismiss his feelings or remind him of his obligation to marry someone of appropriate status. Instead, she told him that love was the one force in the world that did not respect titles or traditions, and that a wise man recognized its arrival regardless of the form it took. Spring came slowly to Valdoria, melting the snows and reopening the roads that had been closed for months. Alexander seized the first opportunity to travel east, claiming he needed to inspect the provinces affected by the winter's hardships. His true purpose was known to everyone, though no one dared to comment directly. He found Elena in a small village nestled in a valley between two mountains, working in a makeshift infirmary she had established in the local temple. The fever had claimed several lives before she arrived, but her treatment had saved dozens more, and the villagers regarded her with a reverence usually reserved for saints and heroes. She looked up when he entered, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The words that had flowed so easily during their first conversation seemed to have abandoned them both, leaving only silence and the weight of unspoken feelings. It was Elena who broke the tension, asking with characteristic directness why the Prince of Valdoria had traveled so far from his palace. Alexander answered with equal honesty, telling her that he had come because he could not stay away, because his thoughts had been consumed by her since the moment she had left, because he had finally understood what he had been waiting for all those years of rejected proposals. Elena's response was not what he expected. She did not blush or stammer or fall into his arms with grateful tears. Instead, she sat down on a wooden bench and invited him to sit beside her, and she told him why his declaration was impossible. She was a commoner, she reminded him, a wandering healer with no family name, no fortune, no political value. A marriage between them would scandalize the court, anger the noble families who had offered their daughters, and potentially destabilize the kingdom. She had nothing to offer him but herself, and in the calculus of royal marriages, that was not nearly enough. Alexander listened to her arguments and acknowledged their validity. Then he told her that he did not care. He had spent 10 years meeting women who could offer him everything except the one thing that mattered. And now he had found someone who made him feel complete for the first time in his life. He would fight for her, he promised. He would convince his parents, silence the critics, and change whatever traditions needed changing. All he asked was that she give him the chance to prove that their love was worth the struggle. Elena did not answer immediately. She looked at him with those intelligent eyes that had captivated him from the first moment, and he could see her weighing his words against her own fears and doubts. Finally, she asked him a question that would determine everything that followed. She asked him if he understood that loving her meant loving her work, her mission, her commitment to healing the forgotten people of his kingdom. She would not become a decorative queen who spent her days in ballrooms and gardens. She would continue to travel, to treat the sick, to fight for those who had no other advocates. Could he accept a wife who would sometimes be covered in mud rather than silk, who would miss formal dinners to tend to dying children, who would challenge him constantly to be a better ruler? Alexander's answer came without hesitation. He told her that he did not want a decorative queen. He wanted a partner who would help him see his kingdom clearly, who would remind him of his responsibilities to all his people, who would make him worthy of the crown he would someday wear. Her work was not an obstacle to their union, but one of the primary reasons he had fallen in love with her. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Valdoria had ever witnessed. The prince traveled frequently to wherever Elena was working, learning about the struggles of his people firsthand. He established a network of oil healers inspired by her example, funding training programs and medical supplies for remote villages. He brought Elena to the palace and introduced her to his parents, who were skeptical at first but gradually won over by her intelligence, her integrity, and the obvious transformation she had inspired in their son. The wedding, when it finally occurred, was both a royal celebration and a statement of change. Elena wore a simple gown rather than the elaborate confections expected of royal brides, and the ceremony included representatives from villages across the kingdom rather than only noble guests. The people of Valdoria embraced their new princess with an enthusiasm that surprised even the optimists at court, seeing in her elevation a symbol of hope for a more just society. In the years that followed, Queen Elena became a beloved figure throughout the realm, known for her compassion and her tireless advocacy for the poor and sick. King Alexander, when he eventually inherited the throne, proved to be one of the wisest and most progressive rulers in Valdoria's history, his policies shaped by the insights his wife had given him into the lives of ordinary people. They had 3 children together, each of whom learned from their mother that true nobility lay in service rather than status. The kingdom prospered under their reign, not because of military conquest or economic exploitation, but because its rulers genuinely cared for the welfare of every citizen. And whenever people asked Alexander why he had rejected so many eligible women before finding his queen, he would smile and give the same answer every time. He would explain that he had not been rejecting them, waiting for her. for the woman who would not only share his life but transform it entirely. She had arrived when he least expected her, in a snowbound mountain pass, and from that moment forward, he had never doubted again.